My name is Loretta Johnson, born and raised on the south side of Chicago, where every block carries a rhythm and every soul has a story. If you've ever lost everything you thought you could depend on, stay with me for a while, because I promise you'll understand why sometimes losing is the only way to find your truth. It was a gray morning the day my world split in two. The funeral flowers had barely wilted when I found myself sitting in Mr. Cooper's office, my hands trembling over Henry's will. My husband of 40 years, teacher, collector, dreamer, was gone, and his legacy was about to be divided. Across from me sat my son David, eyes fixed on the mahogany table, and beside him, his wife Maya, as sharp as the gold ring on her finger. When Mr. Cooper cleared his throat and read the line that would change everything. Sevens. To my beloved wife, Loretta Johnson. I leave the property at 118th and Prairie Avenue, the garage and its contents. Sevens. Maya's smile curled slow, almost merciful. A garage? She whispered. How generous. Sevens. And just like that, 40 years of home, comfort, and belonging dissolved, replaced by the echo of a single key clinking against a cold desk. That night, the air in the house felt colder than any Chicago winter I'd ever known. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like judgment. I was packing the last of Henry's books when Maya appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, perfume sharp enough to sting. Loretta, she said, drawing out every syllable like I was a child. David and I think it's best if you move out. You deserve peace. We all do. Sevens. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I looked past her, hoping my son would say something, anything. But David just stood there, head down, hands in his pockets, a man torn between love and convenience. The same hands that once built model airplanes with his father now refused to reach for me. I don't understand, I whispered. This is my home. Sevens. Maya's tone turned brisk, professional, like she was closing a business deal. It's ours now. Dad's will made that clear. Sevens. She placed a suitcase by my feet. Henry's old leather one. The same one we used on our honeymoon. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a soft laugh. Because in that moment, I realized she wasn't throwing me out. She was freeing me for something she could never imagine. Rain started falling just as I stepped outside, that kind of Chicago rain that cuts through your coat and makes you remember every mistake you ever made. The streetlights glowed gold against the puddles, and I could see my reflection, an old woman in a borrowed coat, holding a suitcase that felt heavier than grief itself. The neighborhood was quiet, but not silent. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone hummed from a cracked apartment window, bending the night into something almost holy. Henry used to say the city talked to you if you listened long enough. That night, I swear I heard him in the wind. I paused at the edge of the driveway, looking back at the house, our house. Its windows blazed warm with light, laughter spilling faintly from inside. Maya's laughter. My son's, too, maybe. I didn't know anymore. I tightened my grip around the single item Mr. Cooper had handed me earlier that day. A small, rusted key, tied with a red ribbon. To the garage, he'd said. I slipped it into my pocket, the metal cold against my palm, and whispered to the dark. Sevens. All right, Henry. Let's see what you've left me. Sevens. Then I walked into the rain, toward whatever waited beyond. By the time I reached 118th and Prairie, the rain had turned the street into silver rivers. The old garage stood alone at the corner, its brick walls sagging like tired shoulders. A faded sign still clung to the front. Johnson and Sons Repair, the Sons long worn away. I slipped the rusted key into the lock. It protested like it hadn't been touched in years. The metal groaned, then gave, and the heavy door creaked open with a sigh that sent dust swirling into the wet air. Inside, darkness waited, thick, patient, untouched. I fumbled for the flashlight on my phone, the beam slicing through cobwebs and shadows. Broken tools hung on the wall. A workbench sat beneath a cracked window. But there was something else, something that shimmered faintly beneath the dust. A painting, large, abstract, and haunting. Henry's handwriting scrawled across the back. Sevens, beneath the jazz, you'll find our truth. Sevens, my breath caught. For a long moment, I stood there, surrounded by rain and ghosts and the scent of oil and time. The key was still warm in my palm. And right then, I knew Henry hadn't left me a garage. He'd left me a secret waiting to be found. If you've ever thought your story was over, pause right there. Sometimes, what feels like an ending is only life whispering. Look closer. Sevens. That's what I tell myself now when I remember that night in the garage. The night everything started to shift. I'd slept on a pile of old blankets, the smell of motor oil and rain thick in the air. The wind howled through a crack in the roof, and I kept thinking about Henry's note. Sevens, beneath the jazz, you'll find our truth. Sevens. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the dusty window, warm and golden like a promise. I walked around the space, noticing details I'd missed in the dark. A record player tucked beneath the workbench, an old trumpet case, stacks of wooden crates labeled fragile artwork in Henry's handwriting. My heart started to race. Inside the first crate, I found paintings, dozens of them, vivid portraits of jazz legends, Harlem street scenes, and southern landscapes so alive they seemed to hum. Each piece was wrapped in linen, carefully signed by artists I recognized from history books. Then, tucked between two canvases, I found a smaller box sealed tight with wax. The key Mr. Cooper gave me fit perfectly. Inside that box were stamps, hundreds of them, perfectly preserved, some from countries that no longer existed. A collection worth, well, I didn't know yet. But Henry had never done anything halfway. And there, resting atop the collection, was a single envelope addressed to me. Loretta, this isn't a garage. It's a vault of everything I believed you'd one day need. Art, history, and freedom. When you're ready, go beneath. The truth is waiting. Sevens, beneath. That word pulsed through me like a drumbeat. Because under one corner of the floor, I noticed something strange. A handle, half buried under dust. I dropped to my knees and brushed the dirt away. My breath hitched when I saw it clearly. Sevens. A steel hatch, bolted shut. Henry's secret wasn't hanging on the walls. It was buried right beneath my feet. And if you're still with me, don't turn away now. What I found next changed everything I thought I knew about love, legacy, and trust. The handle was cold against my fingers, sealed by time and secrets. I hesitated for a moment, half afraid of what I might find down there. After all, People don't build hidden rooms beneath garages unless they've got something worth protecting or something worth hiding. Henry, I whispered, what were you up to, baby? Sevens. With a deep breath, I twisted the latch. The old steel creaked, releasing a rush of air that smelled like paper, cedar, and years gone by. A narrow stairway descended into darkness. My phone's flashlight barely reached the bottom, but curiosity pulled me forward. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with boxes, binders, and carefully labeled folders. And in the center of the room stood a massive oak cabinet. On top of it, a jazz record waited on an old turntable, needle already set against the groove. I pressed play. The first few notes of Take the A Train drifted through the room, soft and soulful. Henry's favorite song. As the trumpet rose, I saw what he'd hidden. A collection of art and history unlike anything I'd ever imagined. Paintings by forgotten black artists, sketches of Chicago neighborhoods from the 1930s, photographs of protests and parades. Our people's story, told in color and motion. And behind a glass case lay the real treasure, a portfolio of stamps, each one pristine, rare, and dated back nearly a century. A small brass plaque read, Sevens, for Loretta, because our history deserves to be seen, not sold. Sevens. I pressed my palm against the cool glass, tears blurring my vision. Henry hadn't just collected things. He'd preserved a legacy, a testament to who we were and what we'd survived. That's when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, purposeful. The hatch door creaked. Maya's voice floated down, smooth as silk and sharp as ice. Well, Loretta, I see you found your little secret. Sevens. The record kept playing, soft, steady, like a heartbeat under fire. And I realized Henry's hidden vault wasn't the only thing about to be uncovered. Maya descended the stairs, like she owned the air around her, heels clicking against the metal steps, echoing through the vault like gunfire. Even in the dim light, her diamond earrings caught the glow of my flashlight, sharp as her smile. Well, Mama Loretta, she said, voice dripping with honey and venom. You've been busy. Sevens. I straightened, though my knees trembled. What are you doing here, Maya? Sevens. Oh, please, she scoffed. David told me you ran off crying after the will. I figured you'd come snooping around sooner or later. I just didn't expect you to find this. She ran her manicured hand along the shelves, trailing dust on her fingertips. How much do you think all this is worth? Sevens. It's not for sale, I said, steady but soft. Her eyes narrowed. Everything's for sale, Loretta. You think Henry meant for this to rot down here forever? He must have hidden it, because he knew I'd know what to do with it. I have connections. I can make sure it's handled properly. Sevens? I laughed once, low and bitter. Handled properly. Like you handled kicking me out my own house. Sevens? The air between us turned electric. The jazz record above still played faintly through the floorboards. Duke Ellington's trumpet weaving through the tension like truth, trying to cut through lies. Maya took a step closer. You don't deserve this. You don't even know what half of this is worth. Sevens. Maybe not, I said, lifting my chin. But I know what it means. Sevens. She smirked, lips curling. Meaning doesn't pay bills, sweetheart. Money does. Sevens. Before I could respond, she spotted the envelope Henry had left, the one marked for Loretta only. Her hand moved faster than mine. "Maya!" I shouted, but it was too late. She tore the seal open, eyes scanning the first few lines. Whatever she read made her expression falter, the color draining from her face. Then, quietly, almost trembling, she said, "Sevens." He knew. Sevens. The word hung in the air like smoke. Knew what? I demanded. But she didn't answer. She just turned, bolted up the stairs, and slammed the hatch shut, leaving me in darkness with Henry's secrets, and 1,000 new questions burning in my chest. For a long moment after Maya slammed the hatch, I just stood there, heart pounding, pulse echoing off the concrete walls. The music had stopped, leaving only the faint hum of the old turntable spinning in silence. I took a deep breath, forcing my thoughts to steady. If Henry knew something about Maya, then whatever was in that letter had to tell me what. I picked up the torn envelope from where she'd dropped it. The pages were slightly crumpled, her fingerprints smudged across the ink. I smoothed it out and began to read. "Loretta, if Maya finds this before you do, know that I've already prepared for that. There's another layer beneath this vault, a place only you can open. The code is our anniversary. Inside, you'll find the truth about the collection. And about her. Sevens." My fingers trembled as I turned toward the oak cabinet. Behind it, half hidden by shadows, was a small steel door embedded in the wall. I entered the numbers, 0612, the day Henry and I married, and the lock clicked open with a mechanical sigh. Inside was a safe, and inside the safe, files, ledgers, and a USB drive. On top of them lay a photograph. Henry, younger, smiling beside a much younger Maya. My stomach dropped. The back of the photo read, "Forgive me for what I didn't see." Sevens. Tears blurred my vision as I read through the documents. Bank transfers, fake appraisals, secret sales. Maya had been selling pieces of Henry's earlier collections for years, laundering the profits through her own business accounts. Henry must have discovered it shortly before his death, too sick to confront her, but determined to protect what remained. I clutched the papers to my chest, fury and heartbreak mixing like storm clouds. So that was why he'd left the garage to me. He'd known I was the only one who'd protect it, the only one who'd see the art for what it was. Our story, our struggle, our truth. As I climbed the stairs toward the hatch, my hands shaking but my mind clear, I whispered to the empty room, "Sevens." "All right, Henry. I see it now. And I promise, I'll finish what you started." Sevens. But when I pushed open the hatch, the morning light revealed something that froze me in place. Maya's car was gone, and so were several of the paintings. When I surfaced from the vault, the daylight cut through the garage like a blade. The air smelled different, emptier. The first thing I noticed was the gap on the wall, where 2 of Henry's most striking paintings had hung just hours earlier. Gone. My heart dropped. I ran outside. The street was quiet, except for the echo of a passing bus, puddles rippling in its wake. Maya's black Lexus was nowhere to be seen. The rain from the night before had washed away almost everything, except the deep tire tracks, leading toward the main road. For a moment, I just stood there, clutching Henry's letter and the folder of evidence to my chest. Grief and anger twisted inside me, until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Henry had trusted me to protect this legacy. I wasn't about to let it be stolen by the same woman who'd looked me in the eye and thrown me out of my own home. I went back inside, turned on the old record player again, and let Coltrane's Naima fill the space. The melody wrapped around me like armor. I made myself think. Calm, deliberate, methodical. That was Henry's way. Maya wasn't subtle. She'd need to move fast to liquidate the stolen art. That meant a connection. Someone local. And I knew exactly who to call. Marcus Dean, Henry's old friend from the art district. A gallery owner with more integrity than most pastors I knew. Henry used to joke that Marcus had eyes sharp enough to see a forgery before it even dried. When I called, Marcus answered on the second ring. "Loretta, I haven't heard your voice in years." "Henry told me to expect your call someday." "Sevens?" The way he said it made me pause. "He told you that?" "Sevens." "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "He said, if you ever reached out, it would mean the storm had come, and I was to help you however I could." "Sevens." I swallowed hard. "Then I'm calling in that promise." Maya took part of the collection. I have proof of what she's done, but I need to stop her before she sells any of it. "Sevens." There was a silence. Then Marcus's steady voice. "Sevens. Meet me at the gallery in an hour. Bring everything." "Sevens." As I hung up, I caught my reflection in the cracked mirror above the workbench. For the first time in months, I didn't see a broken widow. I saw a woman ready for a fight. The wind had picked up by the time I reached Bronzeville, whipping through the narrow streets lined with murals and brownstones. Marcus's gallery sat on the corner of 47th, a small space that looked more like a jazz club than a museum. Warm lights, deep wood, and the scent of old paint and tobacco. When I walked in, Marcus was already waiting. He looked older than I remembered. Silver hair, dark eyes that missed nothing, but his smile was the same. "Loretta Johnson," he said, stepping forward to hug me. "You're right on time." Sevens. I hadn't realized until that moment how much I needed that embrace. The weight I'd been carrying since Henry's death eased just enough for me to breathe. I spread the files across his desk. The evidence, the photographs, the ledger showing Maya's secret sales. Marcus leaned over, his brow furrowing as he read. "Lord have mercy," he muttered. Henry suspected this years ago. He told me he was building a safety net in case she ever turned greedy. Said you were the only one who'd protect what mattered. Sevens? I nodded, my throat tight. He was right. She's already stolen 3 pieces. Maybe more. If she tries to sell them, can you trace it? Sevens. Marcus sat back, tapping his pen thoughtfully. I can try. These kinds of works don't just vanish. They leave footprints. Especially when they're part of a collection as rare as Henry's. He wasn't just preserving history, Loretta. He was curating a record of Black excellence, art that had been lost, ignored, or stolen from our people. Every piece tells a story someone tried to erase. Sevens. His words hit me deep. I looked around at the walls of his gallery. Paintings of Black dancers, street scenes, jazz musicians. Then we can't let her sell those stories, I said. Marcus smiled faintly. I didn't think you would. Sevens. He reached under his desk, pulling out an envelope. Henry left this with me too. Said to give it to you when you were ready. Sevens. I froze. My name was written across the front in Henry's familiar hand. As I held it, A chill ran through me. "Marcus," I whispered, "what did he tell you it was?" "Sevens." He met my eyes steadily. "The key," he said, "to everything." Sevens. And as I opened that envelope, I didn't yet know. The truth inside would lead me straight into Maya's world, and into a battle far bigger than I'd imagined. Inside Henry's envelope was a single sheet of paper and an old photograph, creased, fading at the edges. The picture showed a much younger Henry standing in front of a mural, his arms slung around a man I didn't recognize. But scrawled across the bottom were words that made my heart skip. Sevens. Southside Art Collective, 1992. Truth belongs to those who protect it. Sevens. Underneath the photo was a note in Henry's handwriting. Sevens. Loretta, if this reaches you, it means Maya has crossed a line. The collection isn't just ours. It's part of something bigger. Go to the mural on 47th and Drexel. The man in this photo, Samuel Red Turner, will help you find what's missing. Sevens. I looked up at Marcus, breath catching. Red Turner? I know that name. Didn't he disappear years ago? Sevens. Marcus nodded. Folks said he went underground after a fire wiped out his studio. But rumor has it he's still around, teaching art to kids at a community center near the tracks. Henry trusted him like a brother. Sevens. I folded the note carefully. Then that's where I'm going. Sevens. Marcus frowned. Loretta, this could be dangerous. Maya's got money, lawyers, and people who don't ask questions. If she realizes you're trying to track her down. Sevens. I'm not scared of her, I said quietly. Not anymore. Sevens. Outside, the wind howled through the alleys like a warning, but something stronger carried me forward. Faith, memory, maybe just stubbornness. I drove through the South Side streets, the kind that still hum with gospel on Sundays and sirens on Mondays. When I pulled up to the community center, kids were spilling out after class, laughing, running, free. Inside, I found him, Red Turner. Older now, with paint on his hands and wisdom in his eyes. When I told him who I was, he didn't look surprised. "I figured you'd come," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Henry always said his wife would be the one to finish his fight. Sevens. His fight? I asked. Red smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think this is about art? No, baby. This is about ownership of our stories, our history, and Maya's not the only one who wants to control it. Sevens. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a family betrayal. It was a war over legacy, and I was already in the middle of it. Red led me into a small back room of the community center, walls lined with half-finished paintings and stacks of yellowed newspaper clippings. The scent of linseed oil and dust hung thick in the air. He motioned for me to sit, then pulled a folder from an old file cabinet. "You ever wonder," he said slowly, "why Henry spent so much time collecting instead of selling? Why he kept some things hidden even from you?" Sevens. I hesitated. He said it was to protect our future. Sevens. Red nodded, eyes heavy with memory. That's only part of it. Back in the day, a lot of black artists got cheated, signed over masterpieces for pennies. White galleries built empires off our pain. Henry and I, we started the Southside Collective to buy back what was stolen, piece by piece. Those paintings you found? They're not just valuable, they're evidence. proof of what was taken. Sevens. My chest tightened. You mean, this isn't just art? Sevens. It's restitution, Red said firmly. That's why Maya wanted it. She's been working with a private broker who launders cultural pieces through overseas markets. She gets rich, and the proof disappears. Sevens. The room tilted for a second. I gripped the edge of the table. She already took 3 paintings. We have to stop her. Sevens. Red opened the folder. Inside were photos of Maya, with a man in a tailored suit, contracts, flight itineraries, even wire transfers. She's planning to sell the first piece tomorrow night, he said. A private showing at the Langston Hotel. Only collectors and dealers. Invitation only. Sevens. I stared at the documents, fury boiling into focus. Then we'll crash her little show. Sevens. Red raised an eyebrow. You sure you're ready for that kind of scene? Sevens. I looked him dead in the eye. Henry didn't build this legacy for it to rot in someone's vault. He built it so we could be seen. So yeah, I'm ready. Sevens. He smiled. Slow, proud, maybe even a little afraid. Then let's bring your husband's truth into the light. Sevens. Outside, the evening sky burned crimson over the city, like it knew tomorrow wouldn't be just another night in Chicago. It would be the reckoning Henry had planned all along. The next morning, Chicago woke up gray and restless, the kind of day that smelled like rain and change. I stood in front of the mirror, in the tiny bathroom of the community center, buttoning up a navy coat I hadn't worn in years. Henry used to say that color made me look like purpose itself. My hands trembled a little as I packed the folder Red and I had assembled overnight. Photographs, receipts, letters from Henry, proof that every painting in that collection had been stolen once, and that Maya was about to steal them again. I tucked the USB Henry had left me deep into my purse, right next to my mother's cross. For luck, or maybe protection. Red arrived right on time, his beat-up pickup rumbling outside. You ready, Mrs. Johnson? He asked with a crooked grin. I took one last look at the mural of the children's art on the center wall. Bright colors, messy dreams, and nodded. Yeah, I said softly. Let's go bring Henry home. Sevens. The drive to the Langston Hotel felt like crossing through time. Bronzeville's murals gave way to the glass skyline, where old money and new greed lived side by side. We parked 2 blocks away, blending in with the early evening traffic. From the outside, the hotel gleamed like a jewel. Inside, it was all marble floors and whispered secrets. Red handed me a lanyard with a forged guest pass. You're Loretta Green tonight, he said with a wink. Art historian from New Orleans. Smile polite, walk confident, and don't let that woman rattle you. Sevens. I smiled faintly. After what she did to Henry, she doesn't have that power anymore. Sevens. As we stepped through the glass doors, the hum of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses filled the air. I could feel eyes on me, assessing, judging, but I kept walking, slow, steady, deliberate. Then, across the room, I saw her, Maya, dressed in gold silk, laughing with a crowd of men in suits. And behind her, on display beneath a spotlight, hung one of Henry's lost paintings, the one of the boy and the trumpet, the one he'd painted for our anniversary. My breath caught. You ready for this? Red murmured. I steadied myself and whispered, Sevens. Let's make her remember who she's dealing with. Sevens. And just like that, the woman they'd once called useless walked straight into the lion's den. The ballroom shimmered with polished glass and false laughter, the kind of place where money pretended to be culture. Waiters moved like ghosts, balancing trays of champagne flutes, while the soft hum of a jazz trio floated through the air. I stood near the back, heart steady, but eyes sharp. Across the room, Maya was in her element, charming investors, her voice smooth as butter and twice as slick. I watched her gesture toward the painting behind her, Henry's brushstrokes glowing under golden light. "A rare acquisition," she said, voice ringing with practiced elegance. "Part of a private collection, newly available for sale." Sevens. Every word felt like a knife. I glanced at Red, who lingered near the bar, pretending to admire the decor but scanning the crowd. He gave a small nod. The security guard by the exit had been bribed to look the other way. Everything was in motion. I moved forward, each step deliberate. When Maya saw me, her smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Loretta," she said, recovering quickly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Sevens. "Oh, I bet you didn't," I replied, my voice soft but steady. "Beautiful painting, isn't it? My husband made it for me, for our 25th anniversary." Sevens. A few heads turned. The room, once filled with polite conversation, began to still. Maya's mask wavered. "You must be mistaken," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. I pulled a document from my purse, Henry's authentication papers, complete with his signature and the date. "Funny thing," I said, holding it up. "Henry signed this one himself. Before he passed. Guess he forgot to ask your permission." Sevens. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The investors began whispering, their curiosity shifting toward suspicion. One of the men frowned. "You told us these works came from a verified estate," he said to Maya. Her eyes darted between me, the papers, and Red, who had now subtly positioned himself near the stage, a camera in hand. "Why don't we let the truth speak for itself?" I said, turning toward the microphone meant for the auctioneer. As I stepped onto the stage, I looked out over the crowd, faces frozen between greed and guilt. "Good evening," I said, voice clear as a bell. "My name is Loretta Johnson, and before you buy a piece of my husband's soul tonight, you should know the story behind it." Sevens. The lights dimmed slightly, and all at once, the performance stopped being hers, and became mine. I hadn't planned a speech, but when I took that microphone, the words rose from somewhere deeper than memory, somewhere between grief and grace. "Henry Johnson," I began, voice steady, "wasn't just my husband. He was a man who believed that art could save our stories. He spent his life collecting what the world tried to forget, paintings, sketches, and stamps that tell the truth of who we are, not because they were profitable, because they were ours." Sevens. The crowd had quieted now, the hum of curiosity replaced by something heavier, respect, maybe even shame. "He told me once," I continued, "that legacy isn't what you leave in the bank, it's what you leave in people's hearts. And tonight, someone tried to turn that legacy into a transaction." Sevens. I turned toward Maya, who stood frozen near the front row. The color had drained from her face, but she still tried to smile. "Maya here," I said, "called these paintings assets, But to us, they're testimonies. To every black artist who was told their work didn't matter. To every family that watched their history get sold, piece by piece. Sevens. I lifted the folder Red and I had brought, flipping it open so the investors could see the documents. These are the original ownership records. Henry's notes, contracts, receipts. Every signature right here. You can check them yourself. Sevens. Maya's voice trembled when she finally spoke. This is slander. You don't know what you're talking about. Sevens. Oh, I know, I said softly. I know you sold pieces under false names. I know you forged valuations. And I know Henry found out before he died. Sevens. Gasps rippled through the room. One of the collectors turned away, muttering under his breath. Another quietly slipped his checkbook back into his jacket. I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, eyes locked on hers. You told me once I was just an old woman who didn't understand value. But let me tell you something, baby. What you call old, I call seasoned. What you call useless, I call wise. And tonight, that wisdom's about to save every piece you tried to steal. Sevens. Red, right on cue, clicked his camera. The flash burst like lightning, freezing her stunned face in the frame, proof that truth had finally caught up. And in that silent beat after the shutter fell, I felt Henry's presence, steady, proud, whispering, "You did good, Loretta." Seven. For a moment, no one moved. The flash from Red's camera still hung in the air like the last note of a gospel song. Then the room erupted, voices rising, flashes popping, phones recording. The investors, once charmed by Maya's poise, now turned on her with sharp questions and sharper stares. What's she talking about? One demanded. Forgery? Another hissed. And then someone shouted, "Call the police!" Sevens. Maya froze, her perfect composure cracking like glass under pressure. "You don't understand," she stammered, reaching for her champagne glass as if it could steady her. Henry wanted this collection shared. I was just facilitating. Sevens. I stepped down from the stage, slow and calm, my heels tapping like a metronome of truth. You weren't sharing. Maya, you were selling. There's a difference. Sevens. Security approached, whispering into earpieces. Red handed the USB drive to one of the officers. Everything's on here, he said. Emails, transfers, falsified appraisals. She's been moving cultural property across borders under shell accounts. Sevens. Maya turned to me then, eyes blazing, her mask gone. You think this makes you a hero, Loretta? You think anyone will care about your dead husband's dusty art once it's back in your garage? Sevens. I smiled. Not the kind of smile that hides pain, but the kind that finally lets it go. They'll care, I said softly. Because his art wasn't about money. It was about memory. And I'll make sure it's never forgotten again. Sevens. As the officers led her out, she twisted her head toward me, spitting words that barely carried over the noise. You'll regret this. Sevens. I didn't flinch. Maybe, but not tonight. Sevens. The jazz band had stopped playing, yet the silence carried its own rhythm, a hum of justice, long overdue. Red came to stand beside me, his expressions somewhere between relief and pride. You did it, Loretta, he said quietly. I looked up at Henry's painting one last time, its colors glowing under the soft lights. The boy with the trumpet seemed alive again, his face lifted toward something higher, freer, No, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We did it. Sevens. Outside, the night air felt different. Cleaner, lighter. Chicago's wind carried the city's song again, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally part of the music. The morning after the auction felt like the first sunrise after a long storm. Quiet, hesitant, almost unreal. I sat by the window of my apartment with a mug of coffee in my hands, watching the lights spill over the skyline. The city looked softer somehow, like it, too, was exhaling. The headlines were already everywhere. Sevens. Fraud scandal exposes high-end art theft in Chicago. Sevens. Collector's widow uncovers cultural heist worth millions. Sevens. Reporters had been calling since dawn, but I let the phone ring. Fame wasn't what I wanted. What I wanted was peace, and maybe a little justice for the man who'd loved me enough to trust me with the truth. Henry's collection was safe now. The stolen pieces had been recovered, and the authorities were working to return everything under his name. Red and Marcus were already talking about turning the garage into a cultural foundation, the Johnson Heritage Project, a place for young artists from the South Side to showcase their work, to see that their stories mattered, too. As I listened to the city hum back to life, I ran my thumb along the rim of Henry's favorite coffee mug, the same one he used every morning before heading out to teach. You'd be proud, baby, I whispered. It's finally where it belongs. Sevens. Outside, kids' laughter echoed from the street below, and the sound carried something healing in it, something that said life goes on, even after heartbreak, even after betrayal. The doorbell rang then. I opened it to find Maya's husband, my son David, standing there. His face was pale, eyes shadowed with regret. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he held out an envelope. She wanted you to have this, he said quietly. She wrote it from county last night. Sevens. I hesitated before taking it. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it. Sevens. I nodded, tears burning my eyes. We'll talk later, David, when you're ready to listen, not to defend. Sevens. He left, and I sat back down, the envelope heavy in my hand. I didn't know what Maya could possibly have left to say, but I knew that opening that letter would begin the final chapter of this story. Henry started long before either of us knew how it would end. I sat there for a long while, just staring at the envelope. Cream-colored, edges slightly crumpled, my name written in Maya's neat, looping handwriting. For someone who'd caused so much chaos, she still wrote like a woman who needed to be understood. When I finally opened it, a single page slid out, along with a small photograph. Her words were shaky, raw, so unlike the poised, polished Maya, who had always spoken like she was performing. Loretta. Sevens. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even deserve it. But I need you to know it wasn't supposed to go that far. Henry trusted me once, more than I trusted myself. I thought I could handle his legacy, make it bigger, shinier, something the world would notice. But greed, it's quiet at first. Then it starts speaking louder than your conscience. Sevens. My throat tightened as I read. When Henry got sick, he told me he knew about the sales. Said he saw something in me worth saving. That's why he left the garage to you, not to David or me. He said you'd protect what mattered most. Not the money, but the meaning. And he was right. Sevens. I set the letter down,
my eyes falling on the photo tucked inside. It was an old picture. Me, Henry, David, and Maya at the lake years ago. We were all smiling, sunlight dancing on the water, no shadows between us yet. Tell David I loved him the best way I knew how. The letter ended. And tell him, I hope he learns that love isn't about ownership. It's about letting something bigger than you survive. Sevens. For a long moment, I just sat there, the photo trembling in my hands. I wasn't sure if I was crying for the pain she caused, or for the pain that had led her there. Maybe both. I folded the letter gently and placed it inside Henry's journal, the one he'd always said was for unfinished stories. Maybe this, too, was part of his plan. Not revenge, but redemption. When I looked out the window again, the clouds were breaking. The sunlight didn't erase the storm, but it made the aftermath look beautiful in its own, imperfect way. Weeks passed, and the chaos began to quiet. Reporters stopped calling, the court hearings wound down, and for the first time in a long while, the nights in Chicago felt peaceful again. Red and I spent our days transforming Henry's old garage into something new, something alive. The cracked floors were replaced with polished wood, the dusty rafters strung with warm Edison lights. We hung Henry's restored paintings along the brick walls, each one framed not in gold, but in reclaimed wood from the South Side, honest, sturdy, real. We called it the Johnson Heritage Project. Sevens. A gallery. A classroom. A home for the stories that history once tried to silence. The first day it opened, children came spilling in, wide-eyed, laughing, pointing at the paintings. A little girl stopped in front of Henry's portrait of the boy with the trumpet. "He looks like my brother," she said softly. "He plays too." Sevens. That right there. That was everything. Marcus came by with city officials who wanted to fund a youth art program, and for once, I didn't shy away from the spotlight. I stood on the small stage Henry built for his music nights and told the crowd, this isn't just about art. It's about memory, about seeing ourselves in color when the world tried to paint us in gray. Sevens. They applauded, but I wasn't looking for claps. I was looking for meaning, and I found it in those children's faces, in their joy, in their belief that beauty could come from broken things. After the ceremony, I walked out to the garden we'd planted behind the gallery. Red had carved a wooden bench with Henry's name on it. I sat down, feeling the breeze off the lake, and whispered, "We did it, love. You and me." Sevens. Somewhere deep inside, I swear I heard the faint hum of a trumpet, soft, sweet, familiar. And for the first time since he passed, I didn't cry from missing him. I smiled, because I finally understood. Henry hadn't left me behind. He'd left me forward. That night, as the city lights flickered across the water, I knew I hadn't just rebuilt a garage. I'd rebuilt a future. It was late afternoon when I saw her again. I was in the gallery, rearranging a few of Henry's pieces before closing, when the bell over the door chimed softly. The sound made me turn, and there she was. Maya. Gone was the gold and glitter. She wore a plain gray sweater, her hair tied back, her face thinner, quieter. Prison does that to people. It strips away the noise until all that's left is the truth. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy, filled with everything we'd said, and everything we hadn't. "Loretta," she finally murmured, her voice small. "I didn't think you'd want to see me." Sevens. I studied her, the same woman who'd once looked down on me from the steps of my own home. But now, I didn't see power or pride. I saw something else. Fragility, maybe even understanding. "I wasn't sure I did," I said, honestly. "But I guess Henry would have wanted me to." Sevens. Her eyes filled with tears. "I heard what you've done with the gallery, the kids, the classes. It's beautiful. I want to help. If you'll let me..." Sevens. "Help?" I raised an eyebrow. "I can paint," she said quietly. "Not well, but I can teach basic color theory. The community center said they'd take me on probation if you approved it." Sevens. I didn't answer right away. My heart was torn between pain and compassion, between what she'd taken and what she was trying to give back. Finally, I nodded toward a blank wall. "Then start here," I said. "We've been saving that space for something new." Sevens. Her eyes widened, disbelief and gratitude warring on her face. "You'd really let me, after everything I did?" Sevens. I sighed. "Forgiveness ain't about forgetting, Maya. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of hating somebody. I'm tired of carrying all that." Sevens. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. As she picked up a brush and stood before the wall, sunlight streamed through the window, painting her in gold. And for the first time, I saw not the woman who'd betrayed me, but the woman trying to become better than her worst mistakes. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from winning. It comes from the courage to let grace have the final word. A year later, the gallery pulsed with life. The Johnson Heritage Project had become more than just a place. It was a heartbeat in the middle of Chicago's South Side. That night, the air buzzed with laughter, music, and the scent of fried catfish from the food trucks outside. We were hosting our first anniversary gala, honoring Henry's birthday and the artists who'd carried his spirit forward. Children darted between easels, local musicians tuned their instruments, and the walls glowed with color, art by students who'd once been too shy to call themselves artists. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests as they streamed in. Neighbors, teachers, old church friends, even a few collectors who'd once turned away, but now came to give back. Every hand I shook, every smile I met, felt like one more stitch in a quilt Henry and I had started long ago. When the jazz band began playing Naima, I closed my eyes for a moment. That song used to echo through our house on lazy Sunday mornings, Henry's trumpet chasing the sunlight across the floor. And now, here it was again, reborn, echoing through a room filled with people who understood its language. As I looked around the gallery, at the murals, the laughter, the light, I realized something powerful. We hadn't just preserved history, we'd expanded it. Henry's legacy wasn't locked away in vaults anymore. It was alive, breathing through brushes, drums, and young voices unafraid to dream. And for the first time since losing him, I didn't feel the ache of absence. I felt the joy of continuation, the kind that turns loss into light. In the middle of the celebration, I felt a familiar stillness, one that comes when the crowd fades and your spirit starts to listen. That's when I saw him. David. He stood near the entrance, half hidden behind a row of guests, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, Henry's favorite. His eyes met mine, uncertain, searching. I hadn't seen my son in nearly a year,
Not since the trial and everything that came after. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. Then, like muscle memory, a mother's instinct took over. I walked toward him. "Hey, Mama," he said softly, voice cracking like he was 12 again. "Hey, yourself," I replied, a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "You finally decided to come home." He nodded, his eyes glistening. I should have been here sooner. I let all of it, blind me. I thought I was protecting the family, but I was just protecting my pride. "Sevens." I reached out, touching his cheek like I used to when he was a boy. Pride's heavy, baby. You can't carry it and love at the same time. "Sevens." He laughed through his tears. "You sound like Dad." "Sevens. I learned from the best." "Sevens." We stood there a moment, wrapped in the hum of saxophones and laughter, both of us breathing a little easier. Then I handed him a glass of sweet tea and nodded toward the mural on the back wall, a portrait of Henry holding his trumpet, painted by one of the kids. "Come on," I said. "Let's toast to what we lost, and to what we found again." "Sevens." He smiled, lifting the glass. "To family." "Sevens." "To grace," I said, and for the first time in years, we clinked our glasses and meant it. Later that evening, the lights dimmed, and the crowd gathered near the stage. The young jazz ensemble, kids from the community program, took their places, instruments gleaming under the amber glow. "Tonight," I said into the microphone, "we honor not just Henry Johnson, the artist, but every soul who dared to create beauty in a world that told them they couldn't." Sevens. Applause rippled through the room, warm and reverent. Then the first trumpet note rose, clear, steady, alive. It wasn't Henry playing, but for a moment, I could have sworn it was. The sound filled the gallery, bouncing off the brick walls, stirring the air with the same spirit that used to drift through our living room on Sunday mornings. I closed my eyes. Every struggle, every betrayal, every sleepless night, it all seemed to dissolve in that music. What was left was something pure. Peace. I looked around at the faces in the crowd, black, white, young, old, all swaying to the same rhythm. Art had done what words couldn't. It had united what pain tried to divide. At the back of the room, Maya stood quietly, paint-stained hands clasped together, eyes glistening. She caught my gaze, and I gave her a small nod. She didn't smile, but she bowed her head slightly. That was enough. As the final note faded, I whispered to myself, "We did it. Henry, you were right. Music don't die. It just finds new players." Sevens. The audience rose in applause, and for the first time, I didn't feel like the widow of a great man. I felt like part of something greater, something built from forgiveness, community, and faith. And in that moment, surrounded by light and sound, I knew Henry's story had become ours. Part. Sevens. When the crowd began to drift out, and the night settled soft over Chicago, I stayed behind in the gallery a little longer. The lights were low now, just enough to let the colors on the canvas breathe. I stood before Henry's favorite painting, the boy with the trumpet, and let the silence hum like the end of a long song. That painting had once been hidden in a vault, like a memory too painful to face. Now it stood in the open, surrounded by laughter, music, and second chances. And that, I realized, was the real lesson. Life will always find a way to bury us under loss, betrayal, and mistakes. But we get to choose what stays buried and what rises again. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It's about refusing to let the hurt own what's left of your life. I smiled, whispering to Henry's spirit, "You were right all along. Love doesn't end. It just changes keys." Sevens. Then I turned to lock up, my reflection shimmering faintly in the glass doors. An old woman, yes, but one who'd finally learned how to live without fear. Now, as I tell you this story, I want to ask you something. Sevens. If life handed you back your broken pieces, would you have the courage to build something beautiful from them? Because maybe that's all any of us are doing, trying to turn our pain into purpose. If this story spoke to your heart, if you've ever had to forgive when it hurt the most, leave a below, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that remind us. Sevens. Even after the darkest nights, the soul can still sing.